Hello, and welcome to Slapnomics, the podcast where we help you make better financial decisions with sports cards and TCG. Today, with grading being more critical than ever, we're going to talk about what the most important mistakes to avoid are in terms of being a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert in the grading fields. I'm going to draw on my own experience grading, which is now at about $50,000 of total spend over the last year and a half or so, sending in everything from $50 cards to $10,000 cards, everywhere from CGC to PSA. If you find this subject matter valuable, go ahead and hit a like for me really quick, and especially hit that hype button if you love Slapnomics and you love hearing different strategies that we have for grading that you're not going to hear on other channels. So the format of this show is I'm going to give you 3 mistakes per level. If you start hearing mistakes that you might have made in the past, you're probably at that level if you get 2 out of 3. If I go through all 3 beginner mistakes and you say, oh, Matt, none of those apply to me, then you're probably going to be listening towards the intermediate and maybe the expert level. But first, let's set the stage. It is the end of August 2026, and we have had a massive bull market run through AI. Because of AI innovations and collectibles soaking up a lot of new money. In sports cards, we've seen high-end absolutely popping off because of many outside investments now turning their eyes toward alternative investments. And in Pokémon, people thought it was going to go to the moon, and then all of a sudden Modern took a sharp nosedive. In the meantime, Vintage has continued to get cycled into in terms of investment dollars, and we'll see what happens with 2 massive sets coming out in Delta Rain and 30th Celebrations. Because of all the money flowing into this space, grading has been more popular than it's ever been. So we've seen all the major graders from PSA to Beckett to CGC to Tag all start pausing their lower tiers and establishing longer and longer turnaround times. In fact, just a week ago, PSA extended their turnaround times to their $80 tier level to 50 to 70 business days. Maybe that doesn't sound a lot to you, but that's over 3 months, and you're paying $80 a card. I've been going through my own collection and seeing all the cards that less than a year ago I was paying $20 per for, and it made me yearn for better and simpler days. But this is why we need to talk about grading mistakes for beginners. And the first mistake that PSA and all these major graders is obviously combating is sending cards that are too low to be graded. Now, maybe you're a pure collector, and maybe even if it's a $5 or $10 card, you want it to be in a PSA slab. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The reason that PSA is pushing against that with their policies right now, though, is that PSA markets itself as the most valuable brand for sports card grading. To them, flipping and long-term investment is more important than people's PCs. Being inundated by $5 and $10 cards has them shutting off those lower-tier grading levels, thus making it very clear that they only want cards that are 500 or more in about a PSA 9. If your card is $20 raw and it's $60 in a PSA 10, it doesn't make sense to send at the lowest grading level of $80 right now. After the cost of the card, the cost of grading, and the cost of shipping it back to you, even a PSA 10 is going to lose you money. This doesn't even account for the risk of getting a PSA 9, although in Ultra Modern, especially in Pokémon, that's become less and less of a risk as we've gotten gem rates higher and higher. When I first started out, though, and grading was at $17, $18 a card, I wanted to eke out profits by sending even lower cards to get a PSA 10, hoping that I would train my eye more and more, and that being conservative was going to make me 10-15% profit at a time. The reason this is a mistake back then, and even more so now, is because you have to factor time into things. So the second error that I'm going to bring up to you right now is not factoring in time to the grading process. And to be honest, this is really a more advanced concept that I'm going to delve more into when we get to the intermediate mistakes, but it deserves a mention here in the beginner mistakes. Because even when you're able to send off at those value bulk tiers, expecting to get your cards back in 4 or 5 months, if you're trying to make a profit in cards, you need to understand that you're tying up capital for that entire time period. Sure, maybe you spent less capital up front in grading per card, but if it takes you 5 months to get your card back and actually liquidate it, you have to remember that your capital is tied up that entire time. I've spoken at length in certain videos about the time value of money, and I've talked about annualized ROI for if you're trying to actually run things through a business model. Even if I make $40 profit off of that small card instead of the $20 profit that I might have made, being able to unlock that capital in maybe 3 weeks or a month versus 4 months or 5 months means that I can push that money back out into the marketplace, make a better decision now that I know more after following through markets and learning more things and seeing more opportunities develop. So that's the second mistake beginners make, not thinking about time. The third mistake is only sending your cards to one grader. Maybe you like the look of a slab that one of the graders has and don't like a look of the other one. This is kind of like someone specializing in a sport for one thing, maybe a 3-point shooter in basketball. Well, if that person's great at 3-point shooting, but not great at any other aspects of the game, sure, he's going to be a valuable player, but he's only going to be a role-specific player. He's only going to be valuable for hitting a 3 when you need to hit a 3. And those players are never rewarded with the biggest contracts. Similarly, in your sports card and TCG grading and profit-centered business, you need to have all the tools available to you in your tool belt. If you understand where cards are going to get better grades and better values at Beckett versus PSA versus CGC even sometimes, this is going to empower you to be able to make more profit more quickly, which is going to be able to get you better annualized ROI. And almost more importantly, make less and less mistakes. Not understanding the differences between the graders and the different price points that they can be at, the turnaround times, what they grade more harshly, these are ways to really shrink your profit margins. So those are the 3 beginner grader traps: grading too small of cards, not accounting for time, and not knowing which grader to send to. Now, moving into the intermediate issues, I'm going to stay on that last point about which grader to send to, because this is the real perfect bridge between the beginner and intermediate grader. The fourth mistake and the first intermediate one is, I'm going to say, thinking that all graders give the same grade for each card. Now, many creators have gone over this at length. They've shown multiple submission videos of the same card to show you how different graders give different grades. But this is really critical when trying to determine how to profit from flipping a card. See, I had this idea once that if you could trust a grade or even let one grade slip and move from one grader to another, a lot of times you could make riskless profit. What that means is, if you're getting expensive enough cards and you buy a CGC 9, even getting it into a PSA 8 is going to get you more money. Similarly, at a time when Beckett was really getting clobbered, you could get a Beckett 9, try and move it into a PSA 9, and make quite a bit of profit. But I put that to the test, and I bought 14 cards that were all in the CGC 9 to 8 range or the BGS 8 to 9.5 range. Learn from my mistakes and know that different graders grade in different ways. I'm going to tell you something so important, so make sure that you save this video or even save this specific clip. PSA basically grades to the lowest of the subgrades. If you go through centering, edges, surface, and corners and find one of them to be incredibly low, expect that to be where PSA is. Now, on the Beckett side, you may think, if you're not too experienced with grading, that Beckett is going to be a pure average of all 4 subgrades. That's what I thought at first. But what Beckett really does is they take their 4 subgrades, and as long as you're under the 9.5 range, they will take the average, and if it's higher than the lowest subgrade, they will bump it up by a full point. I believe when you get to the 8.5 or 9 range, they will only bump it half a point. For instance, if you have a Beckett card where the centering is a 9, the edges are 9, the corners are 9, but the surface is a 7, you would think by the average being 34 divided by 4, you should get 8.5. However, Beckett will only give you a 1-point bump up from your lowest grade. So in this case, you had a 7 on that surface. Even though you should get an 8.5 by the arithmetic mean, you're only going to get bumped up to an 8. You're capped at 1 point above your lowest subgrade, and that's only if the average is going to be raising it up. Now for CGC, I actually don't have enough experience to be able to talk about them, but I believe from what I've seen, it's actually a total arithmetic mean. Don't take this as gospel though. Look at some examples. I need to go and look at some examples myself. So, problem 4 solved for you now. Now you know a little bit about the 3 major graders and where they're going to actually be grading your cards and how different it is. The 5th problem and second intermediate one that people hit when grading sports cards in TCG is sending at too high of a level. Now, this was more appropriate when I released that video about my first year in sports cards, about all the grading mistakes that I made. I'll make sure to put this at the end of the video so you can go and see how stupid I was. At that time, I was telling you, don't overestimate what your grade is going to be and don't pay PSA more than you have to. For instance, if you're hoping that your card is going to get a PSA 9, and if it does, it'll be $1,500, but you know for sure it's at least a PSA 8, and that's only a $500 card or maybe $700 card, you shouldn't be sending at that express grading level of $150 a card. You should be sending it at your floor of that regular grading level, and that difference between the $80 that you pay at regular and the $150 that you pay at express is going to become more and more important the more you grade. That's going to compound faster and faster. If you don't get that PSA 9 in this example, you paid PSA $70 for no reason. Now, the reason why I'm saying it was much more apropos back then is because back then, the speeds were pretty similar at many of the tiers, whereas now the speeds are incredibly different. So now paying $150 for a card might actually be in your best interest because you'll get it back so much faster than paying at that $80 level. That harkens back to the whole discussion about annualized ROI and being able to run your numbers. Now, it's almost like I set up this segue perfectly, but the last mistake that intermediates make at grading is going to be not running your numbers. When you send grading out to PSA, BGS, CGC, tag, whatever it is, you should know how long you expect it to take, what your price point is after everything, including shipping, and what your bands are in case you get a high grade or low grade, your ceiling or your floor. Establishing what these numbers are is what's going to provide you some kind of level of success that's repeatable in grading sports and TCG. If you don't measure it, you cannot control it. So those 3 intermediate mistakes that we make in grading again for you: not knowing the difference between graders, sending at hopium levels instead of floor levels, and not knowing your numbers. We're going to wrap this up by talking about the mistakes that advanced graders even make. Eliminating these from your process are what is going to make you a true professional grader. The first mistake people make even at advanced levels of grading is not writing down your pre-grades. I know, it's a pain in the ass to write down what you think all 4 of the subgrades are. But if you remember what I said about the last mistake for intermediate level, if you can't track it, you can't control it, the same thing goes for your level of grading expertise. If you send in a good number of cards and you're not writing down what your expectations are, then you're probably not going to know where you were wrong and where you need to bolster your opinions of the different subgrades. Organic data is coming from you all the time if you're doing this as a business. And if you're not using that data to get better at one of the most critical components of this business, I'm sorry, you are doing yourself a disservice. I don't care how long you've been doing it. The second advanced mistake is trusting a grade. I'm sure you've heard in the hobby, buy the card, not the grade. Creators love to go buy PSA 9s and then show you how they resubmit them and got them PSA 10s. And I'm sure that PSA also loves those videos to be shown to you. So don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying every PSA 9 actually has the possibility of it being a PSA 10. But I will say a lot of PSA 9s are pretty close to being a PSA 10, and if they're borderline, there is a very real possibility that a grader in a better mood might give it a PSA 10. Now, another caveat, is that me saying go get a 1993 SP Jeter foil and try and make a 9 a 10? No. There's certain cards this isn't going to work for. They're cards that are well known in the hobby. A 9 is a 9. But when you come to more modern cards or cards that don't have a lot of known issues for the set or for the specific card, a lot of times you can find grades that are just undergraded. And that harkens back to that first thing. If you're doing subgrades and you get a grade that's way off of where you put the subgrades, either you made a mistake on the subgrades or the grader also might have made a mistake. Maybe it was a new grader that picked it up. Having data allows you to double check these things. So use your eyeballs, guys. And the last advanced mistake in grading is not having proper cash flow management. When you start scaling up into bigger and bigger cards, which is more and more necessary in the current grading climate, you're going to be putting a lot of cash flow at the mercy of the graders up front. The nice thing about PSA is they don't charge you until they've actually run through it, so there isn't as much time between when you've paid them and when you're getting the cards back. People don't think about this compared to Beckett. Sure, Beckett might be 10 to 15 days on their express, but first of all, it takes them a month to start actually getting into the grading queue. And second of all, they're going to charge you the moment they receive it, not the moment that they get into that queue. So your money, your capital is tied up for much longer than it is at PSA. Another factor to consider when choosing your grader. If I'm being forced as someone who's trying to profit in cards and create more and more of a sustainable business to get bigger and bigger cards because grading becomes more and more expensive, so I want to be less and less of a percentage cost, then I'm going to be paying the graders more and more in terms of real dollar figures. Sometimes you can have $10,000 at the graders, and that's money that's not being leveraged in cards per se. So those three errors on the advanced grading level, again, are going to be not taking stock of the actual grades before you send, trusting the grades that you get back or that you see on slabs, and not factoring in liquidity constraints to your business and capital expenditures for grading. The three intermediate mistakes were not knowing your numbers, not knowing the difference between graders, and overpaying for grading levels. And finally, for the basic levels, we had sending in cards that shouldn't have been sent in the first place, not factoring in time, and only using one grader. Now, if you don't make any of these grading mistakes, congratulations, you are a bona fide expert. But if, like me, you have made some mistakes, go ahead and leave a comment talking about the one that really hit home most for you. And as always, please share with a friend. That really helps the channel so much. Thank you so much for being here. It's always great to be able to talk with you guys about this stuff, to learn from you, and to share the things that I'm thinking about with you. Enjoy the last week of August. Keep building, and I will talk to you later.